पोजीशन de सो है क्या ना
हेलो बेटा, आवाज आ रही है?
यस सर
आवाज आ रही है बेटा?
यस सर आवाज आ रहा है सर
शुरू कर दूं?
यस सर शुरू कर दो
ठीक है बेटा, शुरू कर लेता हूँ मैं। आज बेटा माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक्स है अभी, राइट? एक सेकंड बेटा, असल में हेडफोन का प्रॉब्लम था। So far what we did was utility analysis, right? So today we take up consumers demand theory में utility analysis मैंने आपके साथ खत्म कर दिया था। So hello
यस सर आवाज आ रही है
अच्छा
सर
चलें बेटा, ठीक है। कंज्यूमर डिमांड थ्योरी में यूटिलिटी एनालिसिस बेटा मैंने आपके साथ खत्म कर दिया है। So utility analysis is basically divided into two things. One is consumer behavior, in other words. One is utility analysis and the other one is indifference curve approach, right? So today I'm going to start up with the indifference curve approach. What is an indifference curve? First, I'll give you the definition. The definition of an indifference curve is a curve which shows the various combination of commodities X and Y, which yields equal utility or satisfaction to the consumer. What does it mean? What is an indifference curve? Indifference curve is more or less like a demand curve. So what we say, broadly speaking, we say it is more or less like a demand curve, but strictly saying, indifference curve shows the various combination of the two commodities. And the two commodities, we label it as capital X and capital Y. How much? Capital X and capital Y. Both these two commodities yield equal utility. When you consume any of the combination of these two commodities, it is going to give you the same utility, the same satisfaction to the consumer, in other words, right? Now, indifference curve on a diagram of x-axis can be more than one. So what if it is more than one? The higher indifference curve shows a greater amount of satisfaction and the lower one less satisfaction. Am I clear now? Indifference curve, to repeat. Indifference curve shows us the various combination of two commodities. Now here you must be saying, why do we take two commodities? Because we take up two commodities for simplicity's sake. Simplicity's sake means that we have got only two-dimensional diagram. If we take up three commodities like X, Y, Z, then we are going to deal with a three-dimensional diagram. So three-dimensional diagram is a bit difficult to deal in economics. So what we do is we generally rely on two-dimensional diagram, and for the sake of the two-dimensional diagram, we take up two commodities X and Y, capital X and capital Y. Both these two commodities, when an individual consumes, maybe he consumes 1 unit of X and 9 units of Y, maybe he consumes 2 units of X and 3 units of Y. Any combination of these two commodities will give the same level of utility, will give the same level of satisfaction to the consumer. Now, on x-axis, maybe there are more than one indifference curve. Maybe there are two indifference curve, maybe there are three indifference curve, or maybe there are any number of indifference curve. But generally, we say higher the indifference curve, higher the level of satisfaction. Lower the indifference curve, lower the satisfaction. To repeat, indifference curve may be more than one. If it is more than one, it can be 2, 3, 5, 6, any number. So higher indifference curve, it is generally said in economics, higher indifference curve gives a higher level of satisfaction as compared to the lower indifference curve. Am I clear? Which means lower indifference curve gives less satisfaction as compared to the higher level of indifference curve. Now, indifference curve, basically here I'm taking three indifference curves. Now, three indifference curves are going to be drawn. Before drawing an indifference curve, what we do is we try to make up an indifference schedule. Now, in a schedule case, we take up indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3. For simplicity's sake, I'll take up three indifference curves. Now, in the first indifference curve, I'll say quantity X, quantity Y, because I'm strictly sticking to the two commodity case, X and Y. So a person is consuming a certain amount of quantity X and a certain amount of quantity Y. Suppose maybe a consumer consumes 1 unit of X and 10 units of Y, or he may be consuming 6 unit of X and 1.2 unit of Y. Whatever combination he is going to take from these two commodities, it is going to give him the same utility, which means it is going to give the same satisfaction. Now coming to the second indifference curve. Now second indifference curve, again two columns, दो columns आप बनाएंगे, उसमें एक में quantity x हो जाएगा, एक में quantity y हो जाएगा. क्वांटिटी x की सेटिस्फेक्शन नंबर में आप ले रहे हैं 3 4 5 6 7 8 जितना आप देते हैं, और क्वांटिटी y में आप नंबर दे दें 10 7 6 जो भी है. अभी आपके पास दो इंडिफरेंस शेड्यूल्स आ गए. अभी तीसरा इंडिफरेंस शेड्यूल हम लेते हैं. तीसरे इंडिफरेंस शेड्यूल में भी व्हाट वी डू इज वी मेक टू कॉलम्स, and the two columns consists of the quantity consumed of commodity X and commodity Y. इसमें आप यूटिलिटी लेवल शो कर सकते हैं. यूटिलिटी लेवल आप कहेंगे कि कैसे हम शो करें. आप कहते हैं कि क्वांटिटी X 5 यूनिट और क्वांटिटी Y 12 यूनिट, और क्वांटिटी X 8 यूनिट, क्वांटिटी Y 6.2 यूनिट, क्वांटिटी X 12 यूनिट्स और 4.9 यूनिट्स. तो आपके पास इस तरीके से शेड्यूल आ गया, लेकिन थ्री इंडिफरेंस कर्व्स का. क्या है? You have got schedule for three indifference curve, that is schedule 1, schedule 2, schedule 3. All these three schedules shows us the consumption of the two commodities which we assumed earlier, that is commodity X and commodity Y. Now, these points, when labeled or when shown in a two-dimensional diagram, what we get is curves. Three we will be getting here. Now, in this case, we will be getting three curves. Now, when we get three curves, we join the points and we say, as I said before, that the higher indifference curve will give you the higher level of satisfaction. The lower indifference curve will give you the lower level of satisfaction. So we say indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3. So indifference curve 2 gives a higher level of satisfaction as compared to indifference curve 1. Indifference curve 3 gives a higher level of satisfaction to indifference curve 2. Now, whatever combination is being consumed, on y-axis, we take up quantity y. On x-axis, we take up quantity x. Taking the points of the schedule to repeat, we take up the points, join the points, and we get a downward sloping curve. So these downward sloping curve, in other words, is known as a indifference schedule. Now, in case of an indifference schedule, maybe a person tries to substitute one commodity for another. Now, in that case, it is being said the marginal rate of substitution. Now, what is marginal rate of substitution? The marginal rate of substitution of X for Y. That is, in abbreviation, we write in capitals, बड़े letters में MRS, और S के नीचे हम छोटा XY डाल देते हैं. which means the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y refers to the amount of Y that the consumer is willing to give up in order to gain one additional unit of X. That is the rate at which the consumer is substituting one commodity for another. Maybe he's substituting it for giving up 2 units of Y and consuming one additional unit of X, and so on. So that is known as the marginal rate of substitution. That is the rate of substitution between the two commodities at the marginal level. Marginal rate of substitution means the rate of substitution between the two commodities X and Y at the margin, right? So when he tries to substitute one commodity for another, but he still remain on the same indifference curve. That is the assumption. That is, he gets the same level of satisfaction. An individual moves down an indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution for X for Y diminishes. When he moves downward an indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y diminishes. Now, how do we calculate the marginal rate of substitution? Now, taking up the same table which you have made in the case of indifference curve for the two commodities X and Y previously, by drawing the indifference curve, we have got quantity X and quantity Y. What we do is, since it is a margin means at the margin. So we say quantity X, say 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. Quantity Y, 10, 5, 3, and so on. So at the margin, the rate of substitution for X for Y would be 5 minus 10. 5 minus 10. The second unit is 5 of quantity Y. The first unit is quantity 10 of Y. So at the margin, the rate of substitution of X for Y would be the difference between the second unit and the first unit. Now the second unit, as I said, we have labeled as 5, for example. First unit we have labeled as 10. So the difference between the two, that is 5 minus 10, we get 5. So the marginal rate of substitution would be equal to 5. Now, in the case of the second indifference curve, say quantity X. Now, quantity X, we take up 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. Quantity Y, we take up 10, 7, 5, and so on. At the margin of the margin rate of substitution of quantity X for quantity Y would be the difference between the second unit of Y minus the first unit, that is 7 minus 10. So what is the difference? The difference is 3. In this way, you try to calculate the other rate of substitutions. Now for the third indifference curve, again you use the same process and try to substitute one commodity for another, and at the margin you find out the difference, and that difference would be labeled as a marginal rate of substitution. So coming to the definition again, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y, that is MRS in capital, M capital, R capital, S capital. Marginal, M for margin, R for rate, S for substitution. S के नीचे छोटा XY डाल दे. छोटा XY से मतलब कि commodities है, दो commodities XY है. Refers to the amount of Y that a consumer is willing to give up, refers to the amount of Y that the consumer is willing to give up in order to gain one additional unit of X. He may be willing to give up one additional unit of X, but as I said before, he will be on the same indifference curve. He will be achieving the same level of satisfaction. So an individual, as individual moves down in the indifference curve, the marginal rate of substitution falls. In other words, strictly speaking, we term it as diminishes. That's why it is termed as the marginal rate of diminishing or the marginal rate of substitution. Then for the marginal rate of substitution, I've shown you that you make up a table for quantity xy second indifference curve, quantity xy for the third indifference curve, maybe any number 4, 5, 6. But for simplicity, I have taken 3. Now, at the marginal rate of substitution, x for y is that the satisfaction which you derive from the second unit minus the satisfaction you derive from the first unit is the marginal rate of substitution of x for y. Yes, I know that you might be saying, well, how do we derive it for the third? Now, for the third would be the marginal rate of substitution would be the utility which he derives from consuming the third unit of y minus minus the utility which he derives from the second unit, which gives you the marginal rate of substitution for x and y. And in the same process, you try to calculate the marginal rate of substitution for the other indifference curves also. Now, indifference curve generally have three basic characteristics. What are those three basic characteristics? Number one, they are negatively sloped. As I said, they fall downward to the right. That is, it goes through towards the x-axis. So what is the first characteristics? The first characteristics is that they are negatively sloped. Number two, they are convex to the origin. They are convex. आपको पता है कि convexity क्या है? They are convex to the origin. And number three, they cannot intersect. So indifference curve, then the marginal rate of substitution, then the indifference curve shows us three basic characteristics, and those three basic characteristics are can be labeled as number one, they are negatively sloped, coming from the upside and coming toward the x-axis, but it never touches x-axis. Remember one thing. Secondly, we say the indifference curve are convex to the origin. Origin क्या है? Zero, जहाँ पे x और y intersect करता है. और number three, they are non-intersecting. Now, if negatively slope पे तो आपको समझ आ जाती है. Convex to the origin पे भी clear है. लेकिन why two indifference curve can never intersect? Suppose there is indifference curve 1 and indifference curve 2. Now indifference curve 1 crosses indifference curve 2 at a particular point. The point of intersection of these two indifference curves can be labeled as giving the same level of satisfaction or achieving the same level of satisfaction from the two indifference curve. That is, we have said before that the higher indifference curve gives the higher level of satisfaction, lower indifference curve gives the lower level of satisfaction. Now, if two indifference curve intersects, that is higher indifference curve falls downward toward the x-axis and the lower indifference curve falls down toward the x-axis. So these higher indifference curve make an intersection with the lower indifference curve at a particular point. Now, this particular point lies on both indifference curve. That is higher it means that we cannot justify that the higher indifference curve gives the higher level of satisfaction as compared to the lower, because the point of intersection lies on both indifference curve, on the higher indifference curve and on the lower indifference curve. So we say that the third basic characteristics of indifference curve is that two indifference curve cannot intersect. The non-intersection means that they give the two indifference curve, higher indifference curve to repeat lower indifference curve gives the same level of satisfaction. Now, consumer's equilibrium. Now, before coming to the consumer equilibrium, we should know what is his budget line. Budget line is a combination of the two commodities X and Y. Suppose he consumes two commodities, as I said, made an assumption before also, two commodities X and Y. So commodity X, let's say the price is rupees 10, while for the commodity Y, the price is rupees 10. So Y axis पे आप point 10 लेबल कर दें, X axis पे point 10 लेबल कर दें, एक स्ट्रेट लाइन ड्रॉ कर दें, तो वो X axis और Y axis को टच करेगा. When it touches both the points, that straight line is known as a budget line, the budget line of the consumer. So consumer is said to be in equilibrium at a point where the budget line touches the indifference curve. Maybe, for example, one indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2, indifference curve 3. Now, when we draw the budget line, and let's suppose the budget line touches indifference curve 2, the point of intersection, the point where the budget line touches the indifference curve, and we said, let's say it is indifference curve 2. The point where indifference curve touches indifference curve 2 is said to be the consumer's equilibrium. In other words, it shows us the combination of the consumption of the two commodities X and Y by the consumer. Now remember one thing, the budget line barely touches, it barely touches x-axis. ये ना हो कि आप सेकंड इंडिफरेंस कर्व को थ्रू आउट बजट लाइन से टच कर दें. बजट लाइन एक पॉइंट पे टच करता है, तो इसीलिए हम इकोनॉमिक्स में उसको कहते हैं where it barely touches, there the consumer is said to be in equilibrium. To repeat, now we may say that how the consumer reaches an equilibrium, which gives us a combination of the two commodities which the consumer should consume. Now, for that purpose, the first thing is that we should know about his budget line. Budget line gives us the combination of the two commodities of x-axis and y-axis. On x-axis, you label commodity X, on y-axis you label quantity Y with the different price levels. Now, when these 2 points are joined by a straight line, it touches y-axis at one point and x-axis at another point. Now, when this budget line touches, barely touches, we generally say barely touches, बहुत मुश्किल से जो टच करता है एक जगह पे, तो वहां पे कंज्यूमर इक्विलिब्रियम पे होता है. वहां पे कंज्यूमर क्यों इक्विलिब्रियम पे होता है? इसीलिए कि वो कॉम्बिनेशन दे देता है कि इस बजट के साथ और इस प्राइस लेवल के साथ ऑफ द टू कमोडिटीज ही शुड कंज्यूम दिस मच अमाउंट ऑफ एक्स एंड दिस मच अमाउंट ऑफ वाई. Is it clear so far? Any question?
No, sir.
कोई नहीं है क्वेश्चन? जी जी, फैजान बात करें. हेलो
सर, ये स्टार्ट वाला लेक्चर आपने इंडिफरेंस कर्व से लिया था ना?
हाँ, इंडिफरेंस कर्व से
स्टार्ट के, हाँ सही है.
क्योंकि
उसके बाद
पहले हमने यूटिलिटी एनालिसिस किया ना. वी आर डीलिंग विद कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर. तो कंज्यूमर बिहेवियर एक जगह पे यूटिलिटी एनालिसिस है, एक जगह पे इंडिफरेंस कर्व है. आज मैंने इंडिफरेंस कर्व से स्टार्ट किया है.
इंडिफरेंस कर्व से मैंने थोड़ा शुरू में 15 मिनट मिस किया है ना, तो इसीलिए पूछ रहा था ना.
कोई बात नहीं
इंडिफरेंस
फैजान,
कर्व था.
एक दूसरा लेक्चर भी हो जाए, एक इसके बाद दूसरा लेक्चर, 2 लेक्चर्स के बाद आप आ जाएंगे मेरे ऑफिस में जैसे पहले आए थे. आप उसकी पिक्चर लेके आपस में शेयर कर देंगे.
जी सर.
ठीक है बेटा. तो ये हमारे पास कंज्यूमर इक्विलिब्रियम आ जाता है. नाउ इन इंडिफरेंस कर्व we do have a price consumption curve and consumer demand curve. Now, what is a price consumption curve and what is how do we derive a consumer demand curve? Now, listen very carefully. This is a bit technical. By changing the price of X, by making the variation in price of X, which means by changing the price of X or making the variation in price of X while keeping constant the price of Y. We change the price of commodity X and keep the quantity of Y, price of the quantity Y as a constant. And the consumer taste, remember, consumer's taste and money income are constant. Money income is also constant, the consumer taste is also constant. We can derive the consumer's price consumption curve and demand curve for commodity X. Clear? Now, what is price consumption curve? The price consumption curve for a commodity X, the price consumption curve for commodity X is the locus of points of consumer equilibrium resulting when only the price of X is varied. Varied means variation, means changed, right? The price consumption curve for commodity X is the locus of points of consumer's equilibrium resulting when only the price of X is varied. Because in the beginning, I have already made an assumption that price of X is changed, is variating, is being made variation in it. And while the price of Y and the consumer taste and money income is constant. That's why here I have made again the same assumption that is the price consumption curve PCC. Generally, it has been labeled as PCC, price consumption curve, capital P, and capital C, which is labeled as price consumption curve. Now, the price consumption curve for the commodity X, why I'm taking commodity X? Because I have made the changes in the price of commodity X while the prices of Y is being kept constant. Prices of Y kept constant, variation made in the prices of commodity X. तो commodity X इसलिए कहा है मैंने is the locus of points of consumers equilibrium resulting when only the price of X is varied, when the price of X is changed. The consumer's demand for commodity X shows the amount of X that the consumer would purchase at various prices of X. And again, the most popular assumption, ceteris paribus, other things remaining the same. Clear? Now, diagrammatically, you can say price of X equal price of Y is equal to rupee 1 or whatever it is, you make your own example. On quantity, on Y-axis, you take up quantity Y. On X-axis, you take up quantity X. Previously, you have made a budget line. When the price of commodity X is the same as the price of commodity Y, which I said is, and his total income, the consumer's total income is 10, and the price is equal to 1. So either he is going to consume 10 units of X or 10 units of Y or any other combination. Now, these combination is being joined by a straight line, and the straight line which touches X-axis and which touches Y-axis is known as his budget line. Now, to draw the price consumption curve, Y-axis is being constant. On Y-axis, the prices are constant. On X-axis, the prices have changed. That is, the prices of commodity X has been changed and the prices of Y has remained constant. Now, when it is constant, what we do is we draw another curve with the new price level of X and Y, starting with a point on a particular point on Y and leading to quantity X. And we draw a straight line. Now, this straight line where these two lines, the budget lines are tangent, Tangent क्या होता है? Where it barely touches the indifference curve. That is indifference curve 1, indifference curve 2. यहाँ पे हमने सिर्फ दो indifference curve का एग्जाम्पल लिया है और प्राइस हम x की चेंज कर रहे हैं, प्राइस y की हम नहीं चेंज कर रहे. कंज्यूमर इनकम को हमने कांस्टेंट रख दिया है और टेस्ट को भी कांस्टेंट रख दिया है. जब हम प्राइसेस ऑफ x को चेंज कर देते हैं तो लाजमन है, तो जब कम हो जाता है तो एक्स की कमोडिटी ज्यादा कंज्यूम होती है और वाई की कमोडिटी वही हो जाती है। तो जहां पे वाई की कमोडिटी टच करती है एक्स एक्सिस को, तो हमारे पास दो बजट लाइन आ जाते हैं। तो उन दो बजट लाइन जहां पे वो इंडिफरेंस कर्व को टच करते हैं, which where they are tangent to each other, that is the point where it touches. So those 2 points when joined by a straight line is known as a price consumption curve. Clear so far? Now एक्सचेंज का मैंने आपको बताया था, उसकी तो अभी जरूरत नहीं है कि दोबारा मैं आपको एक्सचेंज बता दूं। वो यूटिलिटी एनालिसिस में, एंड यू डू इट योरसेल्फ, दैट हाउ द टू इंडिविजुअल is going to change, make a change between the two commodities. Now, income consumption curve से हम एक दूसरा कर्व बनाते हैं, and that is known as the Angel's curve. ENGEL, Angel curve. Now, Angel curve क्या होता है कि वो इनकम कंजम्पशन कर्व से डिराइव होता है, और इनकम कंजम्पशन कर्व जहां पे बियरली टच करता है इंडिफरेंस कर्व्स को, और उस टेंजेंसी पॉइंट्स को हम ज्वाइन कर लेते हैं, हमारे पास इनकम कंजम्पशन कर्व बन जाता है, और इनकम कंजम्पशन कर्व से आप एंजल कर्व खुद डिराइव कर सकते हैं। क्लियर सो फार? एनी क्वेश्चंस? एनी क्वेश्चंस?
No, sir.
नो क्वेश्चंस?
No, sir.
श्योर?
Yes, sir.
ठीक है बेटा, thank you. That is enough for today. And tomorrow, for the next lecture, I'll take up another topic. Clear? Thank you, beta. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.